Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar. It's July 14, 2016. I think this is going to be a popular webinar tonight. We have a lot of people attending, and I think it's timely at this time of year because we have a lot of clients that come to us for the summer. And I think the parents are in the place where they think this is a wake-up call, a reset, a reboot. We're not sure that we want to do a long-term plan, out-of-home placement, but if we can get it done in between the school year, when the school year is off, then maybe we can be hopeful to get something new. So I'm going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to talk about what it takes. I'm going to talk about what the thinking that goes into it and how to be most successful when your child comes home. And then this has some application to coming home after any program. So if your child is coming home after a therapeutic school or program, this would apply to that also. Talk about our aftercare bias, because I get that question as much as any questions, which is what percentage of your students go to aftercare? And the numbers are somewhere around 70 or 80%, depending upon the year, the time of year. And I tell this story that when we started, our theoretical inclination was that this could be a standalone program for the majority, if not all of our clients, and they could go home. This was started by family therapists who saw the value and importance of a whole system getting treatment and a whole system changing to support the child. And so that was our theoretical bias. Our experience began to show us, after many months and many years, that going home right after wilderness wasn't the best for a lot of families, a lot of individual clients and their parents and their brothers and sisters. And so we developed a bias that came out of experience, not out of theory. And that's the best way that we can put it, is when it gets to this level of difficulty, of struggle, often a 2-month or a 3-month program even isn't enough to reset things. And in some cases, with young adults, for example, or with children who are turning 18 during the course of treatment, coming home might never be a good option. There's a lot of grief and loss in that, but sometimes it doesn't work at home, because of the environment or because of the family relationships are triggering. So I just wanted to say that. I'm going to get to our support of it being successful, but I wanted to get that out of the way. I had somebody I was working with who ran one of these wraparound programs after wilderness or after therapeutic programming. And this involved having a family parent coach, but also having a mentor that was reaching out to and working with the young person in the family. We call them sometimes wraparound programs. And the thing that the founder of this program told me was that there were really 3 categories of families. There were the families that the child and the parent were both motivated, and in that case, of course, they had a lot of success. There were families where neither the parent or the child was motivated, and in that case, they didn't have almost any success. And then there were cases where the parent was motivated and the child wasn't. And in those cases, they said they had almost the exact same results as they did with the situations where both parent and child were motivated. So I tell you, they call these chasers. They call these kind of cases chasers. I tell you that because to give you hope that if you do your work, if you're involved in your work, if you work with whatever professionals you're working with, ideally you start as soon as possible while your child is with us, and start developing your own plan, your own support system, and you take that home when the child comes home. There is success. It's not easy, it's a lot of work, but you can have success with it. I should say that there were really no cases in which the child was motivated and the parent wasn't, of course. So that wasn't part of the equation, although that's theoretically possible. I was teaching a group of families one time who were asking for preventative measures. What can we do so our children don't end up in your program? And these were parents of middle school and elementary school age children. So we were talking about a lot of things about communication, talking a lot about boundaries, talking about a lot about control versus influence and natural and logical consequences and so forth, giving them a foundation in all of these ideas. And then this one mother during the Q&A portion raised her hand. She said, here's my question. I have a 9-year-old son, and although he cooperates and does the chores at home and is responsible, or at least he responds when I ask him and give him consequences to do his chores, he does them when he has rewards or limitations when he doesn't. She said, but how do I get him to get it? How do I get him to get that it's an important part about being in a family? And my response was, you don't. You don't invest in that. The one thing that children, if they could put words to it, would say, and once they get older they can say, get more clear they can say, is the most difficult part with parents often is when their parents not only require them to do certain behaviors, that can be its own challenge, and all of you know that, but when the parent needs them to like it, want it, choose it for themselves, and buy into it, and be happy about it. That's when it becomes an absolute power struggle. So sometimes it's okay just to say that internalization will come along someday. But when we think about child development, we recognize that it doesn't always come until mid-20s or after they're out of the house and are responsible for themselves. So in the meantime, you can plant those seeds, you can have those consequences, those boundaries, those limits, those expectations, and just wait on the long game. And I know that might be, I think a lot of parents want their children to like it and want it and buy into it, so then they don't have to have the boundary. They don't have to have the consequences. Or they fear, simply, that it's all going to be externally motivated. And that doesn't happen over the course of the life. So letting go of them getting it or buying into it is important. And that really does talk about developmental expectations. And I think most of you, if not all of you, have children that are, we have some children that are over 25, we have some children that are 30 and older. But the majority of you have children in our program that are 25 and younger. And it's important to understand that developmentally they're not ready to think like an adult. They're not capable of thinking like an adult. And so it's okay to treat them like children. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that in terms of understanding that they're not going to buy into it. They're not going to understand cause and effect. And so it really does ask of us as parents to practice boundaries. I've made the joke, although it's not really a joke, I've made the statement sensitively to many of the parents that I talk to these days, that what I imagine is, if I was your higher power, if I was your version of God, and I wanted you to learn the lessons that I think you need to learn, what I would give you is your child. I would give you your child so that you could learn the lessons that you need to learn. And what I mean by that is, we have to learn to practice some of these things that our children's acting out behavior is requiring of us. And it's painful and it's difficult, and we deserve empathy and compassion. And we need to practice self-compassion when we come up short, because we all come up short. But it's important to understand that asking our child to carry it for us, asking them to grow up for us, being resentful of them because they're not grown up enough, is really an us problem, right? It's our problem. The research tells us in Aftercare, one research study that we have tells us that the families who identify themselves as successful identify two main things that they utilize from their care. And this is across several different programs. Number one, the eradication of black and white thinking. The families that identify themselves as successful, the intervention as successful and continuing, they don't think of things in terms of black and white, all or nothing, either or. You know, we're back at square one, or we're good or bad, pass or fail, all of those kind of simple dichotomies. You know, they talk about some things have changed, some things are the different. When there's slip up, when there's regression, they don't say things like, this is just like it was before. They say things like, I'm seeing some behaviors that remind me of some old behaviors. I'm seeing some that don't, right? They learn to talk in these dialectical ways, right? It can be both. It can be a little bit of both. And they allow themselves to be complex enough to both think and speak in those ways. And the second thing is that they utilize the communication skills, including listening with their children. And although that doesn't solve the problem, it is a part of successful family living. I want to talk for a second about a behavioral contract. I want to say behavioral contracts are fine, but let me be clear about their value. I'm going to say this very clearly. I don't know that I've ever seen a child before or after our program who has been involved in a behavioral contract, when they broke it, agreed with their parents that they deserve the consequences. And I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of families involved in behavioral contracts. So again, if you think the behavioral contract is going to do the work for you, so you don't have to struggle to set a boundary and follow through on it, it won't. You're fooling yourself. And you're asking it to do something for you in the same way I was just describing with the child that you need to do for yourself. Behavioral contracts, ideally, what they can do for the parent is get clear. They can help you get clear. They can help you clarify. They can help develop a foundation of understanding between you and your child, which, by the way, later on, if the child violates it, will not remember, not agree with, say things have changed, say they signed it under duress, all of those things. But it can get you clear. It can also help you with your own conscience to know, I said this, I made this clear. I can decide this without a lot of second guessing. Notice I said a lot of second guessing. But I can decide this without second guessing myself. I can feel comfortable with the follow through on what I've written. So that's what a behavioral contract, and I've seen families use it effectively. I've seen families use it as a jumping off point for dialogue, even self-reflection for a parent, or better communication between two parents, identifying goals. Also, again, developing a dialogue with their child about problem solving and ideas. So if you use it for that, it works fantastic, but it won't do the work for you. And like I said, in my experience, I've never seen a child, after having violated a contract, agree to it and accept the consequence willingly. There's always been some loophole that they were looking for. Why time matters and why it doesn't. You know, a lot of research in mental health treatment says that there's no substitute for length of stay. Length of stay is the best predictor of outcomes. And that's not something, for example, that insurance companies and managed care companies want to talk about or know or hear. You know, they want to find out, how can we do it as short as possible so it's as affordable? I think a lot of parents have that same kind of energy. So the research tells us that length of stay matters. But why it doesn't matter is it doesn't matter how long the length of stay is if the entire system doesn't adjust. If parents don't learn to dance a new way with their child, a new systemic interaction, if they don't reorient themselves in the way that I always talk about on these webinars, then it doesn't matter how long it goes, right? It doesn't matter how long the child is in treatment. So it's important. It's not to say that it's a cause and effect and the parents are causing it. But if we don't make systemic changes and our children come home, we are likely to reinforce behaviors that we really don't want to have appear. And that's, you know, the child's job is to be a child. And our job, simply put, is to be a parent. And that requires us and asks of us a very difficult thing. I'll talk about getting ready for coming home. If your child is coming home, again, whether it's right after Evoke or after a therapeutic school program, start now. And I don't care where you are in the process. Start now. At Evoke, we ask you to go to 6 12-step meetings. Al-Anon, Families Anonymous, or Codependence Anonymous. We don't say that it's for everybody, although I think that they're incredible. We don't say that that you'll all love it. We ask you to go to 6. We ask you to do some of the assignments in the parent portal, to read the books, to watch the webinars. Obviously, the folks that are on tonight's webinar are doing some of their work. Do it now. Don't delay. Maybe if your child has been here 4 days, you can take a breather. But get started as soon as possible. Start thinking about the transition, the time together again, as soon as possible. I had one young client recently say to me that he had thrown away a year of his life in therapeutic programs, both wilderness and aftercare, and was lamenting it. And you know, part of my response after listening and empathizing and making sure that that space was held for him, part of what I said was, or what we talked about was, if you didn't go, there might not have been any more years left. You were on a path where either the quality of your life was going to be so low, or potentially some of the impulsive decisions you're making could have ended it. And that's what was going on for your family. So it's important to understand that being committed to the process as early as possible is life-saving, at least quality of life-saving. Go to meetings, like I said, go to therapy. We ask you to do those things in the parent portal. There's a lot of things in the parent portal that we've written where we say, ask your therapist about a visit. You know, write the letter of accountability and share it with at least one other person. Maybe a sponsor or a mentor or your therapist. And part of what we're trying to get you to do is to be responsible for your own work, your own participation. And not from a place of blame or shame or guilt, but from a place of openness and from a place of learning and from a place of being a part of the solution. So get involved in those as soon as possible. Learn to take risks. Learn to be teachable. Learn to learn. By taking risks, I mean putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be coached. Some parents walk on eggshells, want to do it right, don't want to make a mistake. I get that. I get that because I'm human and I have some of those same inclinations. But that's the opposite of what I'm talking about. It's okay for us to coach you. I would rather you be honest and as authentic as possible so that there is something to work with, so that we can coach and teach and learn together in the process. So putting yourself out there. If you go for a field visit, and there's a whole webinar on field visits, so I won't go into that in depth, you'll find how difficult it is for the clients, for the students out in the program, and how we ask them to do that, and how you're asking them to do that by sending them here. Show them that same kind of courage. And even share with them how difficult and uncomfortable it is for you. That'll be a wonderful empathic message for them. But taking risks in learning. The co-participating comment is discovering your own co-participation. In my book, there's a chapter on codependency or co-participation. Reading about codependency, reading in my book about that, finding out ways, asking yourself questions, allowing yourself to be asked difficult questions. I was talking to a parent just today who was considering a program for her son. And my discussion was you continue to consider the intervention by whether it's going to work or not, by the outcome. And I get that. We, of course, want outcomes. But you're being held hostage by your son's reactivity. And so finding a way to show up authentically, honestly, compassionately, insightfully, assertively, pick all the attributes and characteristics that you want. That's all you have control of, is showing up in those ways. And then your child gets to do with it what he will. You're definitely, at this point I was telling you, you've made a case that he can use this level of care. But your self-doubt is all embedded in trying to control your child. And that kind of co-participation can be as damaging and undermining to him, to his progress, to his future, as setting a tough boundary. Right? So, understanding what co-participation and codependency means. Working on guilt and shame for everybody. Guilt and shame for the entire family. And guilt and shame is hard to recognize when we start this work. But when we get into this work, we can start to see it more clearly and more often when we talk about our reactions to other people, how guilt keeps us from our truth, how shame makes it so that we don't want to show up, and even where that shame came from. Because we weren't born with guilt and shame, right? That was taught to us. We learned that certain things about us were unlikable, that people found them unpalatable, reprehensible, those kinds of things, rejectable. And so we learned to hide those things. We were told things like we're selfish, or self-centered, or melodramatic, or too sensitive, right? And we saw that look on others' face that they didn't like it, they found it unpleasant. That was about them, but we believed that it was about us. And so then we have all this stuff buried, all this truth, all this wisdom, all this self that is buried. And so much of our work and the whole idea behind Evoke is to pull that out, to find out what those barriers are, to work on those, to heal those, and then to find access to all the wisdom, all the insight that is buried beneath all of that. Developing response flexibility is a term from the book Parenting from the Inside Out. And basically, the more we can make sense of our own past, like Alice Miller says, the only enduring weapon, we have only one enduring weapon against our battle against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique history of our childhood. The more clearly we can look at our past and understand how it affects us, the more capable we are of responding to our children and to others thoughtfully, intentionally, instead of reactively. Right? That's the opposite of response flexibility. When we react reactively from a fear response, from an anger response, from a fight or flight place, we're not being flexible in our responses. We're having very little choice in the matter. But the more we go back, that's why I believe in doing work. As a therapist, as a father, as a child, I believe in it. Because the more we can get a handle on that, the more choices we have in life. The more clear we see things. I use this example with the staff. I just used it in in-service this week. Some of you may or may not be NFL football fans. It's one of the sports that I like to watch. In the National Football League, the NFL, when the player makes a jump from college to the pros, and they ask them what's the difference, they almost all say the same thing. And their answer is the speed of the game. The pro game is so fast, and the athletes are so strong, that it's difficult and you've got a lot of information. I want to talk about how the game slows down. If you think about a great quarterback, and most people know, even if you're not football fans, you've heard of the quarterback Tom Brady. Tom Brady's a great quarterback. He's won many Super Bowls. And quarterbacks in the NFL have about 3.5 seconds, give or take, to get rid of the ball before they're going to be tackled by some 6'5", 230-pound freakish athlete, right? And so that 3.5 seconds, they have to read a whole bunch of information. For Tom Brady, that 3.5 seconds feels like 10 seconds. If I went out there, or a rookie quarterback goes out there, it feels like about 1 second. Because the more prepared, the more aware we are, the more information. When Tom Brady steps back, he's looked at the entire defense. He's seen it on film. He watches hours and hours of film. He's practiced responding to certain players on the other team and where they're standing. He sees the formation and has an idea. All of that information is like that. And so he can make 15 decisions in 1 second. Whereas you and I, because we're not practiced, or a new quarterback who's not as practiced as Tom, it would go very, very quickly. And that's the idea of response flexibility. The more work we do as therapists and as parents, the slower the game moves. We're processing a lot of information, and so we're not reacting to it. This last bullet point of embracing the journey and walking slowly, it comes from it's a Buddhist idea about the idea of radical acceptance. This is your journey. This is not a detour. And much of the suffering that we experience is because we think we should be somewhere else. We think something else should be happening in our lives. And if we can embrace the journey, we also get access to all the insights, gifts, blessings that it has to offer us. If we spend our time wishing we weren't and lamenting the fact that this is where we're at and I want to get back on track, we'll miss so much that is offered to us in this process. And walking slowly means you're already there. Happiness is not around the corner. Happiness is not when this or that gets better. Happiness is this idea that, yes, this is painful. Yes, there's grief. Yes, there's sadness. And that's a part of our life. And the more we can embrace those things, the more happiness and joy, awareness and connection we can have. So walking slowly is that idea that if we realize we've already arrived, if we realize that we can have happiness in every step, we can have some peace in every step, and that every step might have with it some joy, some pain, some sadness, some hurt, some loss also. And we can learn to embrace that, to become friends with those emotions that we oftentimes try to get away from or numb out from or escape from. If we can learn to embrace all of those, we'll become much richer and much more joyful in our lives. When I think about my experience of working with parents and children and what happens when they go home, kind of the mistakes that they make, here's a couple of lists I came up with. To the students and clients, oftentimes, and this is true of many people who are new to therapy, they take the therapeutic skills and they weaponize them. In other words, a hammer can be used to build a house, for example. But it also can be used to kill somebody by banging them over the head, right? So the hammer itself has no inherent good or bad value to it in those examples. The value of it is in the hand of the person using it and what their intention is, what their knowledge and awareness is. And the same is true with the skills. If I used my I feel statement to try to guilt you, I've just weaponized it. If I use it to try to shame you, on and on and on, I'm just weaponizing it. Right? If I listen even, and my goal in listening is to get you to change, and that'll come out some way or leak some unconscious way, I've weaponized it. So weaponizing it is something that new clients and students and clients often do in the process. Manipulating, of course. The strange thing about manipulating, and there's a whole webinar on manipulation, is that while in our young lives and when we want something, we look at the positive attributes of manipulation, but later on in our lives we understand that we don't want that. We don't want to have those kinds of relationships that are susceptible to manipulation, because that's all about control and enmeshment and overlap. We want to be able to show up authentically and be seen and heard by the other person, right? Not be dismissed or changed. So manipulation, while for sometimes in our lives we like it, it's one of those things where if you live by it, you die by it. Sometimes they just don't want to do the skills, right? That was a context I was in at Evoke, and I don't want to do them anymore. right? It didn't apply. It wasn't the real world, right? I always laugh about that idea. That's not the real world. It's strange to me that the new Pokemon Go app, for example, that's the real world, right? The real world is our computers, our electronics, television, whatever it is. And the fake world, the unreal world, is being out in nature and sitting with yourself and being with people and problem solving and communicating and connecting. So I think we have it backwards, but that's kind of the thinking, right? And so that again, even though your child does well with us, even though they do fantastic with us and they get a lot of insight, it's really, really important that you understand that you're still going to have to require certain skills. You're going to have to practice them. And there will have to be boundaries because it just won't self-perpetuate in a lot of ways. I tell the young students and clients, use your therapist. If you really want to do well and you struggle with your parents, use your therapist. Talk to your therapist. Have a therapist so that they can advocate for you. Because we parents are crazy sometimes. And we have all the power in many ways. And so if you want an advocate, use your therapist, right? Help them to help you, to have discussions with your parents, to help negotiate when it's appropriate to negotiate, to be heard when they're not hearing you. Encouraging your parents to look at themselves when they're not looking at themselves. So using their therapist is one of the mistakes that they make. Expecting parents to change. It's the same thing that parents do too. It's that old adage that I give, which is, in this process, my suggestion to all of you is that you consider, you accept the fact that nobody else is going to change. Imagine, at least, nobody else is going to change. And so what are you going to do if nobody else changes? And I think children expect their parents to change. Number one, us parents are old. Us parents haven't been in a program for 8 weeks, right? Haven't been immersed in programming for months in some cases. Right? We're settled, right? And we're not as symptomatic, at least outwardly, as the child. And so our motivation, our need to change is a lot less. And we're going to make mistakes because we're human, just like you are. So I think children, clients, students often use their parents' imperfections and lack of progress as an excuse. That's the mistake they make. They make the mistake that context doesn't matter, that I can bring with me this new insight, this new energy, this new self into any situation and I'll be fine. I can walk into a bar. I can go to parties. I can do whatever. And I'll be fine. That's another mistake that they make. They don't realize how powerful that when you hang around friends that are, for example, you don't tend to pull them up. They tend to pull you down. And then, of course, black and white thinking. They make that mistake, which I've already talked about. Feelings are to be solved is a mistake that parents make. I remember coming to a transition camp, a graduation experience, and there was a grandmother and a grandfather there. And for various reasons, the mother and father weren't involved in the child's life. And the grandmother met me at the car, and she's like, "It's not going well. I'm really struggling." And I said, "Okay, I'll come. That's why I'm here. Let's see what's going on." So I come and sit and start to ask questions of everybody. And basically, grandmother said, we started talking about his therapeutic school that he was going to. In this case, he was going to a therapeutic school. And he was really upset. And so I said, "Okay, tell me more about what that looked like." And she said, "Well, he gave us an I feel statement about how upset he was." I said, "Okay." And then what happened? She said, well, nothing. And I saw the child was cooking some beans and rice, I think, and he got a little smile on his face. And I asked the child what he did, and he said, "I just told her an I feel statement, and I wasn't asking for anything. I just was sad and scared." And so I taught the grandmother and grandfather, there's no problem here. And as parents, we sometimes think we need to get our children happy, not sad, not upset, not frustrated. That's very different than managing behavior, right? It's okay to have boundaries around behavior. But if we start putting boundaries about what they can and can't feel, then we're a part of the problem. They want their kids to get it, and that's what I've been describing several times. They want their children to get it. So we don't have to do the work of boundaries. So it's easier. And I get it. I'm a dad of 4. I've spent years wanting and being resentful and being disappointed over and over again in that process. But that's one of our errors. I think parents expect it to be easy. If your child is coming home, or when your child is coming home, I should say in many of your cases, I think that's one of the biggest traps, that you arrive, that you're done. It is not a done thing ever. 20 years from now, it's not a done thing. I just had a parent at a parent group. I think she was 80-something years old. She was actually the mother of one of the parents of our program, but she asked if she could come. And she was talking about her 60-year-old son, or however old he was, something like that, and the difficulty that she was still having with him. Right? This is 80 and 60. And then one of the parents that was there for a child in our program was like, gosh, it's refreshing and a little bit intimidating that it still goes on. I thought I would be done by then. So it's a lifelong. You know when you're done, because when you're done, you're not breathing anymore. Until then, keep working. Black and white thinking, of course. Parents will say things like, we're back at square one, right? This is just like it was before. It's never the same. You know, there's that old adage, you can't step in the same river twice. You can't unexperience this process. And sometimes it looks dramatically bad and difficult. And there are huge setbacks, absolutely. But if we think in those simple terms, we really set people up and trigger people. Arriving. I've said this to my clients recently. Never arrive. And don't be around people who have arrived. Because people who have arrived don't have anything left to learn. They're not a student. They're not humble. They're not open. They have it all figured out. Just gently walk away from those people. Run if you have to, if they come chasing you. The honesty trap refers to that parents get so curious about, is he telling me the truth? Is this real? And that's not the real question with any of us, let alone children. The real question is, does it have legs? She might feel passionately about what she is saying or he is saying. That doesn't mean it's going to stay there later tonight or tomorrow, right? I can wake up in the morning and say, going to go exercise today, I'm going to eat healthy today, and then I can find myself at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon having a donut out of the vending machine. Was I not sincere in the morning? It felt sincere. I thought I was real, but I didn't have what it took yet. And we can all apply that in certain areas in our life, see that in people. Sincerity, honesty isn't the question. The question is, does it have legs? And sometimes, as parents, that's why we need help with professionals and therapists. Because, and I wrote about this on my blog, although we love our children more than anybody else does, it doesn't mean that we see them the clearest. We get a lot of us mixed up in them, a lot of projection mixed up in them. So, in fact, the research says that parents are some of the worst at assessing whether or not a child is telling the truth. And the research in the book, Nurture Shock. And then parents focus on what they can't control. They spend a lot of time and energy thinking about the child's regression, the child's progress, the child's behavior, the child's relapse prevention, and do very little to focus on their own. That's the biggest mistake, right? If you can focus on your own response to their negative behavior, to their breaking of the contract, to their regression, if you can focus on that, you're going to be more hopeful, less anxious, less depressed, more empowered. I took some, these are from some comments when I did this webinar a couple of years ago, so some of these, they're still true today, but I didn't want to claim that I got them this week. I didn't ask for them this week. These are some comments that I asked for from some students who had graduated from our program. As far as friends, you have to be strong enough to be able to do what you want to do around the same people or not be around them at all. I love that. Peers will always influence you, but it's important always to choose the influences that you want to go along with. I don't know if the issue is navigating away from parties. I think the solution is making the right decisions based on your goals of parties. That's another person's opinion. My parents, in AA or NA, they'll often say, you need to change your playground and your playmates. So many parents expect excellence from me only because I prove that I can do things that I put my mind to, so I can't complain about that. As far as family dynamic, we are able to solve issues that come about and work through them by just talking them out without having it become a stressful situation. The conversations that we have are handled by talking about how I plan not to let this happen in the future and how I can improve for the future. I think solos, that's that 3 or 4 day experience where they're by themselves in our program. I think solos were very valuable because they had an impact on me while I was throughout myself in nature. Something about the solos was great for me, and I benefited through the alone time to figure some big things out. So self-reflection was something that client experienced. I like to say that things are very hard when you get back to the real world. You almost feel like getting back into the wilderness is the right thing to do, and it's the thing you want to do. I can't tell you how common that is. You graduating alumni families, many of you could attest to that. The things that challenged you before you came to the program are still there when you get back. The only difference is that you're equipped with tools that you learned while you're in the wilderness to help you overcome those challenges. I was in the wilderness for depression, anxiety, and cutting. There were times after I got back when I felt alone or felt no one understood what I was going through, where I thought cutting was the right thing to do. But what my counselors taught me, probably talking about field staff, helped me veer away from cutting. Since I've been back, I haven't cut once. And with medication, I've been feeling very well. There are hard times, but unlike before, I am now able to appreciate the good times. My daughter is doing well, now a senior and on the honor roll, but it hasn't been easy. Going to a new school has been crucial. Realizing old friends are not really friends is a painful and slow process. She has had a few stumbles along the way, and she and I have had some huge conflicts. The most important thing has been to keep trying. Radical acceptance helps a lot. In a month, she'll have been sober for 2 years. She is subject to random drug testing at school and has passed every one. I would say that accepting she has to earn back trust has been a tough hurdle. Wilderness gave her the tools, but not a free pass. She still speaks fondly of the program and busts a fire from time to time just to show she can. I want to conclude with this. When I think about a child coming home after Evoke or after the program after Evoke, and parents start to discuss it, I really pay attention to what their thinking is. Why are they doing it? And if parents are thinking, well, we're done, or he's simply ready, I start to worry. If they start to say, we're ready for the challenge. We feel like we've been practicing and we're ready for the game. We know there are going to be conflicts. We don't know if it's going to work out perfectly. We don't know if he's going to maintain the level of progress and health. And we all will. We don't know if he will when he gets back or she gets back. But we're ready for that. And if it does, we won't think it a disaster. We won't look back on it and say it was a mistake, because the mistake or the success of it isn't in the child did well or not, failed or passed. The success is I was clear about my choice, I jumped into it, and I'm going to learn from it. And if things go poorly, I learn something and I make new choices. That kind of thinking makes it okay. But if you think in simple terms, simple pass and fail, simply that he's ready or she's ready, if you come from a place of guilt, if you come from those places, you can't possibly make the right decision. You can't. Because the decision is defined by the intention and the thought process. If you make the decision and you recognize, I'm trying to be authentic, I'm trying to be honest, I'm looking at my codependency, I recognize we have some challenges, I'm staying away from black and white thinking, I'm committed to all those things, I have an aftercare plan for him or her and me. If you do it from that place, and I'm open to the possibility, and if it fails, that can be a success. And if it succeeds, that can be another kind of wonderful success. If you approach it from that way, you can't make the wrong decision. So it's important to approach it with the right mindset, with a healthy mindset, instead of the control and the codependent one. Start your work now and do your work. Always do your work. Always go back to it. I had a parent who asked me just yesterday, day before yesterday, do all programs emphasize doing your own work as much as you do at Evoke? And I thought about that, and I thought, not probably as much. Some do, of course, but Evoke therapy, the programs at Evoke, were the ones who really invented any kind of family work and wellness therapy. It didn't happen before we opened up in 1998. It just didn't happen. And it's evolved over time and been cumulative over time. And for me, the reason I talk so much about it is because I see the value and the necessity of it in my own life as a father and a therapist. I've been watching so many thousands of families go through this process. And the ones that are successful, by far, are the ones where the parents say, I'm going to do this work not out of a burden, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but out of, at first, the need to help my child, but at second, because it's a better way of living. And it's brought me such a joy, such an awareness, such an enlightenment, such a gift to my life. So hopefully you can get to that place. And if you start off just doing it because you think it's going to save your child, that's an okay place to start. The good is good and bad is an opportunity idea is, like I said, if things go well, great. If things go poorly, you're going to learn. You're going to adjust. You're going to adapt. You're going to respond. You're going to figure out how to deal with that and figure out what that taught you and figure out what that can also teach your child. Own the decision, right? It's your decision to make. And these are big decisions. And these decisions have an impact and reverberations and ripples in our lives. And so I can't make it for you. I can challenge your thinking. I can ask you tough questions, but I can't decide when you should take your child home, no matter how old he or she is. It's not my responsibility. and you wouldn't want to give it to me, because if something goes badly, you need to be able to look in the mirror and say, I did the best that I could. Look at the thinking that goes into the decision to bring a child home, and be willing to look into it. Be willing to be asked tough questions. Be willing to be honest. When parents start saying, I feel guilty, or it's been long enough, or I miss him, I think, well, that's probably not enough. Let's talk about that. Let's peel that back a little bit and look. All right? Those are the kinds of things, and there are several others that it's important, valuable to be honest. Avoid the black and white thinking, and then use the skills. All right, I'm happy to go for any live questions on topic or off topic. On topic first. Nothing yet? Okay, I'll have another slide. All right, the upcoming parent workshop in Toronto is there. All of them are listed there. Those are for large groups, experiential. Family workshops on the right side is the really intensive work. So we have Finding You. That's for any adult, any age, parent or not. It could be young adult. Sometimes we have about half and half, but anybody who wants to come and do deeper work, come to the Finding You. We've obviously, the one in July is over and past and closed, and the Heroic Journeys in August is closed also. There's the admissions number to contact. We want everybody to go to 12 of these meetings, 6 of these meetings, 12-step meetings while they're with us. So please just try them out, try various ones, see what works for you. Talk to other people. Here are the upcoming parent support groups. I'll be in Toronto soon. We have New York City. That just passed. I didn't update these slides. Chicago is on the 28th. Los Angeles, I have that new format in Los Angeles where we're going to do a potluck. It's on a Sunday so we can avoid traffic. And then we'll do a parent meeting from 5 to 7 after the potluck. RSVP, and then we'll let you know what to bring. Follow us on social media. I get a lot of questions from families that we talk about on social media, Twitter and Facebook all the time. So if you're on those, follow those. It's a way to stay connected all the time. Of course, go to our blog. Here are the upcoming Pursuits trips. You can go to our website. These are sober trips. They can be for families. You can schedule them just as your own personal family, or you can have young adults, I suppose even older adults. It's good summer adventure fun. Therapy light. The book is on paperback, also audio. Go to our foundation book page there. 10% of the profits go to the charity, the foundation, to help people who can't afford treatment. We've already put several people through the program as a result of the foundation's money raising and our gift back to them. All right, any other questions before I close up? How much of the parent's progress and work is factored into the therapist's recommendation for aftercare returning home? That's a great question. A lot. A lot. You know, when a parent's thinking about it a certain way, you can tell this has a really good chance of working, or it really has a really good chance of not working. So it's a big part of it. I will tell you that there are a percentage of families, not a huge percentage, so there are a percentage of families that you know from the get-go they need it more than anybody, but they won't do it for the exact reason, because they need it. And so sometimes that's the case. I would say 1 out of every 5 clients that go home, that's the case, right? And in those, as a therapist, you want to be gentle, compassionate, encouraging, make recommendations, but not get into a power struggle, because it's easy to get into a power struggle when you see that. But for the majority, 80% of the families whose children go home, it's somewhere in that gray area. I had a family, and I've had more than one, who have taken the child home. It hasn't gone the way that they wanted. He's either come back to us or gone somewhere else, and had a lot of success. And they didn't look at it as devastation or disaster, right? It was just part of their journey. And that's a healthy way to think about it and approach it. And again, I think when parents are thinking about progress and success too simplistically, it's really important that we spend a lot of time trying to help you get over that. That's one of the reasons why we offer the webinars for life, so that you can come back to these even after your child is home, after us, or after the next program. Be reminded of these principles. Never stop learning. Never stop being reminded. So it does figure into it. Is it important for parents whose children are not coming home, perhaps they are young adult participants, to do the same level of work? That's a great question. Yes, because the work, it's probably not as critical, right? Not as necessary, perhaps, but still as valuable. I have young adult children and children still in the home. And those relationships are just as important to me. There's not as much contact, but the contact we have has the same qualities, positive or negative, to them. And so it's just as valuable. It can be just as helpful. If I can be a safe person in my 23-year-old's and 22-year-old's life, if I can be a safe person in their life, that's a wonderful thing to get to be, and a wonderful thing for them. And so I'll just use listening, learning to listen without judgment, learning to listen without defensiveness, learning to listen without dismissing or talking them out of their feelings. It's just as valuable with a young adult, because there aren't many people in the world that can do that for people. And I've had to do that with my young adult children, maybe as much and as an important place or way or discussion as with my younger children. So it's as valuable, for sure. And critical means it's probably not as the consequences of not doing it might not be as negative, but the consequences of doing it are just as wonderful, if not more wonderful. And they reach into all corners of our lives too, because the work is really about us. How long does it usually take to break the old friends? When the child is ready, it takes an instant. But sometimes they want to experiment because they think they're strong enough. Right? It's a difficult task for parents also to manage that. So we talk parents through that because it's difficult to do that. But when you're ready to change, you don't need to be told. That's the answer. Is when you're ready to change, you don't need to be told to hang around new friends. You know it. It's not fun if you're sober to hang around people that are always getting drunk. You don't hang around people that are skipping school when you're going to school, on and on and on. You don't want to. You don't want to be there in that life with them. So you really don't need to be told. It's really more of an outcome of a person's readiness and willingness to change than it is something that they do to get there. But with the younger children, of course, you can set some boundaries around that and police that some. It can be really, really challenging. Usually we will, because of how difficult that can be, oftentimes we'll tell parents to parent around the outcomes, like how the child is doing, and to not manage it completely, because they'll see them at school, they'll find new people at school, on and on and on. So we are struggling with determining appropriate smartphone privileges. Any advice? Oh my gosh. If I knew the answer to that question, I would be famous. It's difficult. My answer. You're not going to like this answer because it's not specific enough, but it's okay. There's no right one way to do it. You get to do it. You get to decide, and you get to decide based on your intention. Talk through it with a therapist, ideally. And then when your child doesn't like it or debates it, you won't debate back because you're not trying to be right. You're just trying to make your best guess, right? And there's no absolute perfect one way to do it. And it's different for every child. So you get to decide. Go work with a therapist and make sure that you're walking through the dialogue with them, dialoguing with a therapist so that you're having a session around it, so then you're getting to the bottom of it. And then own it, and then don't try to be right. Don't tell them that you've figured it out. Don't try to explain to them why it needs to be this way. Just be general and say, we're going to do 2 hours a day, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And when they say you're wrong, say, I might be. That's the chapter in my book on idiot parenting. I might be wrong, but I'm doing my best, and that's what we're going to go with. And you don't have to like it or agree with it, and I'm not going to try to convince you. Our son is currently at Evoke and wants to come home at 5 weeks. We are scared and feel he is making a mistake. He is 20, and we want to influence him without controlling. Young adults are difficult, and for those of you who don't have young adults in the program or haven't had, it's difficult because they can walk away from the program. That's not an unusual want and request, and so be patient, walk slowly, talk to your therapist about it. And with young adults, we try to help them to get a taste of it. It might come down to you setting the boundary if you're not welcome in our home. For those of you who are on social media, or maybe if you just Google this, I posted on social media today, on our social media at Evoke, I shared the article and on my own Twitter page, I shared the article on, it says, Tough Love, the Most Excruciating Night of My Life as a Parent by Michelle Rose Gilman. Read that short article on Huffington Post. You can Google Most Excruciating Night, Michelle Rose Gilman, Huffington Post, or you can go to the social media if you have it. But check it out, because it can come down to that. It can come down to, often with young adults, it comes down to, here's what we will and won't support. And we don't come out with that in week 1 or 2, right? We work our way into that. With adolescents, we'll say it from week 1 or 2 often, because we can legally make that decision. But often, not always, but often it requires a parent to draw that hard of a line. And most of the time, not 100%, but by far most of the time, young adults will respond by following through if the parent will set that boundary. The controlling is trying to talk him into it. Non-controlling is saying, here's my boundary, you can choose what you want. The simple, stupid example I always give is, if I say to my daughter Olivia, you have to eat your chicken and peas to have a popsicle for dessert, right? That's not controlling. Controlling is after when I say that, I say, come on, Olivia, one more bite. Olivia, eat your chicken. Olivia, do you want to be strong like your brother Jake? Okay, Olivia, I'm going to eat your popsicle. That's controlling. Controlling is not setting a boundary. That's the opposite. Influential parents is when we set healthy boundaries and assert ourselves. Controlling parenting is when we try to talk them into it and get them to choose what we want them to choose through emotional coercion. So that might be backwards in your mind. Or it could be me projecting. Are there any Al-Anon classes online? I don't know that. There are. I know there are programs with. There's a program called Lion Rock Recovery, and they do online meetings for alcoholics. I don't know if they do online meetings for Al-Anon. Go to the Al-Anon page and look it, or Google. I don't know. That's a great question. And Google Lion Rock Recovery and see if they have anonymous meetings for family members and not for the addict themselves. Our child is 14 years old at Cascades and is working on ASD issues. Can you speak briefly about ASD children coming home? ASD, for those of you who don't know, is Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder. I don't know that the principles are dramatically different. Okay, I think it's this. So the behavior is different. Why is different? Like why the behavior exists is different because it's structural or organic. So the specifics are different, but it's the same kind of thinking that goes into it. With an autism spectrum child or a drug addict child, there's no judgment in either one of those, right? There's no good or badness or morality in either one of those. It's just a brain disease, right? It's just a developmental issue. It's a mental health issue. If we look at it like that, then it's not different at all, right? What works for them? What are they ready to do? What are we ready to do? How are they equipped? How are we approaching it? So I don't have a dramatically different thing to say for ASD children. It's the same because I don't think of it. I know there are specific accommodations and specific decisions to make around that. Like ASD children might more commonly be addicted to the computer and have school refusal and learning differences, of course, that affect their school participation. So you would have to make decisions around that, but the core psychology of it is the same. Sorry, there is a webinar on that, but I don't think in terms of coming home that it changes my opinion or the education that I would give you, because I look at all mental health issues in that way very, very similarly. Maybe something like heroin addiction is more, right, the risk of death is more imminent, so that would be more serious. That might be a different way. What is the best index parameter to decide if the child is ready to come home? If you're ready, that's the best index. I mean, there's some basic things that we're looking at, like, can they use the skills? Can they problem solve and go through difficult times and feel things? Can they be patient? Can they accept the possibility that they're not coming home? If you give them the what I call the no boundary, the no you can't come home boundary, can they handle that? Right? So there's a lot of whatever the presentation, whatever the relationship issues, the behavioral issues were, are those improved? How are they handling stress? How are they dealing? How are they doing it differently? How has their thinking evolved? All of that becomes a part of the equation, absolutely. But for me, it's, are you ready for the challenge? And have you done your work? There's got to be a baseline of improvement for it to make any sense at all, for the most part, right? But beyond that, there's a lot of gray area that has to do with the parent's thought process and readiness to go into it. If it comes from guilt, if it comes from feeling a fear of being rejected by your child, for example, I can go on and on and on. If it comes from those places, it's not the right thing to do. If it comes from, like I said, a readiness to do the work you've got started, they've established a fantastic baseline, you're ready to change gears, to respond, if you will. It's one of those things where it has to be a dialogue with your consultant or your therapist, and it has to be a place where you talk about your thinking and allow your why, the why of your decision, to be challenged and discussed. The what is not as important as the why. I know I'm repetitive, but that's the truth. All right. The next webinar won't be till next Thursday. I'm going to be out in the field Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. So I'll be coming in from the field, and then we will meet you on the 14th. So is that right? That doesn't make sense. That's today's date. Steve, when is... I didn't change that slide. I'm sorry. That made no sense whatsoever. I wasn't even reading it. It'll be next Thursday, but it's not going to be the same webinar I just did tonight. So it's going to be a different one. So we'll let you know what that is. Thanks for participation. Thanks for Steve for moderating tonight. Have a great night. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.